Hi everyone, I'm Urvi. I'm from the University of Leeds Career Service, and I'm so happy to welcome everyone to our Working in the UK for International Graduates session for our Discovery Week. I'm joined by two very lovely people here today, Victoria and Yusuf, who you can see on screen. And I'll just be helping them with questions that you guys might have and moderating throughout the event. Before we begin, I would like to talk about the graduate outcome survey. Is as a graduate, you've got a voice in helping us support future university students. The graduate outcome survey asks what you've been up to since you've graduated and how far your degrees helped you in getting where you are. Filling the survey out and filling it honestly will not only help the university evaluate and make constructive changes to its courses, but it will also allow current and future students to gain an insight into career destinations. To help us shape the future of our university better, please look through your inbox for an email from your university at graduateoutcomes.com and follow the link to complete the survey. It should take less than 10 minutes to complete, and it's a great way to get your voice heard. So I would highly recommend getting on that. Without further ado, let's start with the session. We've got Victoria here and we've got Yusuf with us, and they'll talk about their journeys as international grads in the UK and how they've gotten to where they are today. Over to you, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Euskaitis. So basically, I first came to the UK back in 2014 to study for my master's degree at University of Sheffield. I'm originally from the States, and I realized that I wanted to study medieval archaeology as my specialism. So that kind of necessitated me coming over here. So finished up that degree, ended up at the time you could stay 6 months after your degree ended, so stayed for that full 6 months, and basically started applying for my PhD as soon as I got my grades back from my master's, because I have quite a lot of US student loans, so I wasn't going to do a PhD until I knew I had the chance to apply for some funding. So I got that distinction for my master's, applied for some funding, ended up studying here at University of Leeds for my PhD. That was a really great experience. I graduated with a degree in medieval studies, and basically I had decided during that time while I was studying that I wanted to stay in the UK. Staying in the UK was something that I realized would be quite difficult to do because I'm in the humanities. As I'm sure many of you know, it can be really quite hard to find jobs, to find employment that pays enough to meet the salary threshold. And also with the new points-based system they've introduced, if you get a degree in the humanities, it actually is worth less points than if you get a degree in STEM. So there's a lot of ground to make up. And I had to sort of make a decision about not pursuing academia because I realized it would be pretty much impossible to be an academic in my field and meet the visa requirements unless I received a really prestigious scholarship, which obviously you can't really count on that happening. So the way I kind of got to that decision was through going to the Career Centre at University of Leeds. They were hugely helpful throughout my PhD. Started going in my very first year, and I built in kind of talking about career planning into my supervisions. And I made it really clear in my supervisions that, I was thinking about those next steps with the visa process. At the time, in the very early stage of my PhD, I was dating someone British who, at the time, I thought, oh, we'll get a spouse visa. That's the way things will go. That relationship kind of disintegrated in that first year of my PhD. So then I had to start rethinking what other routes I could do, how I could make this staying in the UK a reality. And so I realized I needed to go for that skilled worker visa. And then I started thinking about, okay, what kinds of experience can I start to get, work experience can I start to get through my PhD that's going to help me to get a career that's going to allow me to meet the requirements for the skilled worker visa. And essentially, essentially, I realized I couldn't work in archaeology because there were no archaeology firms on the list of government sponsors. And so a lot of my sort of area of specialisms, and for instance, English Heritage, National Trust, those kinds of heritage organizations also aren't on the sponsor list, largely because the kind of roles you get frequently wouldn't meet the threshold for the visa. So what I did realize was that Russell Group universities were on the sponsor list. And with my background and skills, I could probably develop a specialism within professional services, within the university kind of area that I could move forward with the skilled worker visa. So instead of doing teaching through the university. So instead of doing teaching of undergrads, which was what most of my peers were doing at the time, I started working with educational outreach at University of Leeds. So they're working with widening participation, widening access to higher education, that kind of thing. And I started going into schools to deliver interactive workshops about academic skills to students in schools and colleges. And that ended up being a really major thing for me that opened a lot of doors because it allowed me to build professional expertise, professional skills in the widening participation sector. And when I finished my PhD, I was able to apply for a DES, a doctoral extension scheme visa. It doesn't exist anymore, but it's a 1-year student extension visa that you used to be able to apply for. That's now been replaced with the graduate route. So I had only 1 year to basically work in any area to build my skills to hopefully be able to get to that skilled worker visa. So I was able to get a role in public engagement at University of Central Lancashire, got a maternity cover role, worked there for that year. At the end of that maternity cover role, I secured a role at University of Southampton that was sponsored for the skilled worker visa in this particular area of widening participation that met all the requirements for the visa. So that was huge. And since then, I've basically been able to get a global talent visa. That happened quite recently in September of last year. And then from there, I applied for international or indefinite leave to remain in December, just before Christmas. I received my results for that. So I've really gone through pretty much all visa routes except for the spouse route. And that's kind of my story and my journey.
Thanks, Victoria. That was really, really interesting to know how you've gone through all different passages. Yusuf, if you want to talk about your experience and your story.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Yusuf, and I am a graduate from the University of Leeds. I did a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. So that was 3 years, after which I did what's called a placement year. During that placement year, I worked with a small business in Leeds in solar energy to kind of gain experience that extended my student visa. So what Victoria just mentioned about only 6 months being available once you finish your degree, the government was about to introduce the graduate visa when if I had stayed 1 more year. So when I graduated in 2021, the graduate visa was available and I was able to apply for it. So after the placement year, I completed what's called an integrated master's, which is when you take an additional year within engineering, in addition to your bachelor's, to make it count as a master's within the UK. And I applied to the graduate visa. Before getting onto the visa, I was applying to jobs in my final year of university. So I was applying to a lot of engineering firms in different industries, but I was also applying to, you can apply to normal roles. So you start off as something specific within a company. You can start off as a design engineer, or you can start off as a project manager, etc. Or you can apply to something called a graduate scheme. Now, graduate schemes, they have pros and cons. They allow you to rotate within different departments in a company over a period of 2 to 3 years. However, the 3-year long graduate schemes, you cannot get onto them with a graduate visa because obviously your visa is only 2 years long. There's also the thing that as you're going through the assessment stages, the company may, not all companies sponsor visas that do offer graduate schemes, but some of them, if they see that you have potential, then they can decide that after the graduate scheme, they will invest in however many years are left to sponsor you before you can become a citizen or keep working with the company. So in the end, what I got was a graduate scheme. That's what the company that I'm working on right now, working with. And I was first sent to Norwich, which is on the complete other side of the country, where I did 1 year in project management with that company. And then I moved to Bristol for another year, where it was more engineering design based. And then after some time, I signed a contract with the company and they sponsored my visa once my graduate visa was over. And I've been on 1 year of sponsorship so far. That sums up my journey, essentially.
Perfect. Thanks, Yusuf. I'm sure our audience has a few questions for you guys. So if you have any questions for Victoria or Yusuf, put them in the Q&A tab that you see on your screen, and they'll be more than happy to answer them. Till then, this is both to Yusuf and to Victoria. What tips would you give to a complete beginner who's just starting their job hunt in the UK? Anyone wants to pick this up?
So I would say definitely go to the Career Centre. That is the first step, because I think for me, there's some differences, for instance, with the way you put together CV versus the States versus the UK. They're just different nuances that you might not even think to, consider. So the very first thing I would say is start going to the Career Centre. Take some of the courses. I took a course in my very first year that was all about how to articulate the skills that you have from your PhD. So when you say, oh, I study, how do you put that on CV? What particular skills are within that? That was super helpful. And I took another course that was all about helping you figure out what you wanted out of your career. So for instance, through that, I sort of figured out that for me personally, staying in the UK was what my goal was. That was really important for me for various personal, professional reasons. And so for me, I was willing to maybe be more flexible with which career direction I went in. So in other words, not being an academic, but doing something else instead. I was okay to do that because my overall goal was to stay here in the UK. And, other people might have different priorities. The decisions you make might look a little bit different, but doing some of that thinking in the first place is really good. And then once you get further on where you're at the point of applying for jobs, the Career Centre is so useful. You can do mock interviews. They'll help you prepare your CV. They'll literally help you at every stage. I remember going in with a spreadsheet that I made of different jobs I was applying for, chatting through what was working, what wasn't, and basically saying, okay, I'm not getting the results I want. How can I adjust this? So basically make use of the support that you have at the university and build that into your supervisions. Let your supervisors know that, this is something you're pursuing and, I need to put some time towards this every week. Make it a priority.
Yeah, that's really good advice, and I'd highly recommend coming into the career service. You can walk in for drop-in sessions with peer support assistants from Monday to Friday from between 10 to 4, or you can book an appointment with one of our career counselors. Like Victoria said, you can have your applications looked at, you can book mock interviews, or just talk through your career path with a career counselor if you go onto My Career and book through there. Yusuf, do you have any tips for complete beginners during the job hunt?
Yeah, so to echo what Victoria said, the first step is it's actually even just attending events like this one, because they will point you to the right direction. I myself attended a lot webinars. Any webinar that didn't interfere with my lectures, I usually attended. And you get to see a lot of people's, because not everyone's experience is going to be the same, and some tips from some people might be more applicable to your situation, and that's helpful. The other thing is when you're going to these career appointments for a CV check, for example, I think there's a tool now on the careers website where you can get it checked via a piece of software to get it to a certain level first. And then it saves you having to go through the basics with the career advisors and actually going through the more tricky bits of tailoring your CV. So both of these pieces of advice are good. And lastly, I'd say start getting involved in some sort of extracurricular activity as soon as you can, even if it's not necessarily something that you will continue for the rest of the year. But if you start doing some volunteering, or if you're involved in a society, or even just a part-time job, or a student ambassador job, all of this is going to contribute towards you being more employable by the end of your studies.
100%. That's some really good advice. Thanks, Yusuf. There's a question from Gauravi asking, most companies automatically reject applications based on work rights in the initial stages without actually having the hiring team review our CVs. How would you suggest tackling this? I think Yusuf, you slightly touched on this, and if you want to go into more detail, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'd say to start with any company, because the rules have changed recently. So a lot of companies that maybe used to sponsor have also changed their stance on sponsoring. The best thing to do is any company that I've applied for was at least willing to take people on a graduate visa before they looked at whether they were going to sponsor them or not. And you can read that on the vacancy before you apply. So I think, save your effort and focus on companies where they don't, on the vacancy, it doesn't say must have the right to work in the UK, because otherwise you're wasting your time and their time. The second thing would be to look at the sponsorship register. So there's a big PDF document that if you look online, UK Tier 2 sponsors list. It varies from year to year, so they do need to update it every year, but you can start searching for company names or browsing through and looking what companies work in things that you have skills with, and try and send. They don't always have advertised roles, but sometimes if you email them, they can take you on an internship, and if you really prove yourself in the internship, they can offer you a role afterwards. So I have a friend who, for example, started on the graduate visa. He's now a year into the graduate visa, and the company that he's with has never sponsored anyone before, but they've started speaking to him about sponsorship because he's been doing a good job so far. So I'd say, one, avoid any company that says we don't sponsor, and two, try and look for opportunities that aren't necessarily advertised, because sometimes those small to medium businesses are more likely to sponsor you than the bigger organizations. So that friend that I'm talking about, he's working in a engineering consultancy, so it's mainly for building services. So if you're into mechanical or civil or electrical engineering, it's to do with that side of engineering for buildings, and it's only a team of like 13 to 20 people, so it's not a big company. I'd say that those are the two main things. There's a website, I'm not sure if there's still a collaboration going on with them, but it's called Student Circus. And what they're meant to be doing is they're highlighting all the opportunities where the companies do provide sponsorship. So that's also somewhere to keep your eyes on, because it filters it for you instead of having to keep looking through a lot of applications.
Yeah, we're still working with Student Circus. So if you go onto your My Career account, which you have access to even as a graduate, you'll be able to access Student Circus on there. There's another question from Maral saying, I've graduated with a master's in December last year. I should have graduated in 2022, but that was postponed. My student visa and BRP expired in 2022, and I turned back to my country. I've applied for the tourist visa and went for graduation in December last year. Now I've turned back to my country, but thinking to find a job in the future. Do I still have a chance to apply for a graduate visa or directly to a worker visa? I'm going to let Tom, my colleague, take this question for you, Miral. Tom, can you hear us? If you want to pick that
Yeah,
up for us.
I can indeed. So hi, Morale. Thanks for your question. Thanks for attending. It's more difficult to apply for the graduate visa, which is the one that allows you to stay for 2 years when you're not already in the UK. That doesn't mean it's impossible to get a visa. You can still apply for jobs and you can still look for jobs that offer sponsorship. And if you're successful in applying for those, it can be more difficult to do it when you're not in the UK already. That doesn't mean, as I said, it's sort of automatically impossible. What I'd recommend you do, and you're welcome to follow up with us afterwards at graduatesupport@leeds.ac.uk. If you've got a graduate account on My Career already, you can book in with someone, and that goes to anyone, not just Burrell, who's on the call. And you can speak to an advisor about this, sort of one-to-one. It's probably a better format than sort of trying to work through in this session with a group. So yeah, if you've got a graduate account on My Career, feel free to just book an appointment. Or if you haven't, register an account on My Career. We'll pop the links into the chat so that you've got them. There's the email address from Natalie, and I'll pop the My Career registration in there as well. If you've already got it, feel free to book an appointment. But it's not impossible. It is harder. I will also offer the question to Victoria or Yusuf if they've got anything to add on that, and I'll just pop myself off for now.
I mean, the only thing I would probably add is that it's also become harder to go straight to the skilled worker route because they've significantly increased the earning threshold. So for instance, when I got my skilled worker, in my field, it just would not be possible to earn that threshold. There's actually quite a lot of concerns around that about just how high the threshold is. So I think certainly from my perspective, when I was looking at this, I was thinking I really need to make the most of that year when I am on the student visa, because what you need to be doing is getting as much experience as you can, really building that career knowledge and building your CV as much as you can during that time before you try to make the leap to the skilled worker. So it's all about taking the right opportunities and really carefully thinking about getting the right roles to kind of get you over that leap. So if you can get onto the student route first, that's probably the best thing you could do, because it gives you a bit of time to build your skills here in the UK so that you can make that leap into that earning threshold for the skilled worker.
Thanks, Victoria. Yusuf, do you have anything to add to that? Sorry, go on.
No problem. It's just a couple of things I've observed from other people around me, and I've seen some people take the academic route, and then once you're in the academic route, and if you can prove that your work is highly relevant or unique in one way, you can switch to something called a global talent visa. Victoria, you may know a bit more about this. And I think it's, with the state that things are right now, this might be a slightly more feasible route, but then it would mean that your goals would need to align with academia as opposed to industry.
Yeah, so I was briefly on the global talent visa before. So one of the pluses of global talent is that instead of applying for leave to remain in 5 years, you can do it in 3. So that moved my timeline up for applying for leave to remain. So I was actually only on it for a few months before I'm now on ILR. The thing with the global talent visa is that you don't have to strictly be in an academic field. So for instance, I work in universities. I currently work at Bath Spa. So after I got the global talent visa, I switched roles from Southampton to University of Bath Spa. And I did have to show how the work I'm currently doing is informed and shaped by my studies. So it was all about crafting a narrative around what I was doing with my PhD and about how that's carried through with my current work. And I also had to back that up with demonstrating I've still been in my spare time, I've been publishing, I've still take the opportunity to attend some academic conferences. I've recently got funding to go to an academic conference through the Royal Historical Society. So basically, if you go through the academic route, and if you get, for instance, an academic award, sometimes the process through Global Talent can be quite straightforward. But you can apply through peer review, which is what I did because I didn't have an academic award and I didn't fit kind of directly into that box. And you can basically make a case for yourself. You can put forward a narrative about your work, why it's particularly impactful in the UK. But you do kind of have to be able to demonstrate that you're still engaging with that academic side in some way. And so, for instance, again, I've continued to publish, I've continued to do public talks on my research, and the work I do at universities is sort of linked to what I did during my PhD, but it's kind of in the professional services realm, but I was still able to make that link and make that connection, and I was awarded that. So you can do Global Talent, and there are multiple routes into it. The other thing I would say is it's easier to have everything you need if you're a bit further along in your academic career. Because if you haven't published anything, for instance, or you're at those earlier stages, it can be quite difficult to have the evidence you need. But if you do have some of that, it is worth looking at Global Talent, because in a lot of ways it might be a better route if you can meet the requirements.
Perfect. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to ask a follow-up on that may help clarify a few things to people. But was there a specific department or person you went to for advice on gathering all this evidence and putting your application in?
So actually, the way the Global Talent Visa ended up working out, because I was on the skilled worker and I was actually getting quite frustrated because I was on it. I needed to stay with my job for 5 years, but I wasn't really happy at my job. So it was actually, I was sort of talking to a colleague who was also international, and he mentioned, oh, have you thought about the Global Talent Visa? And I thought the Global Talent Visa was an entrepreneurship visa because I think it's changed recently. So it hadn't even came to mind to look at it. And my colleague said, no, you should look at this through the peer review route. You might be able to do this, because he knew that I was still involved in doing some academic stuff. I basically ended up figuring out what to do through networking, because this colleague sort of put me in touch with some other people. And then I was very involved with UCU, my union. There were some meetings about supporting international colleagues, and I mentioned that I was going on the Global Talent, or trying to apply for Global Talent. And so that's how I met some other people in the humanities who had applied or were currently applying, and we all kind of supported each other in that way. If you are interested in the Global Talent route, I'm also always happy to talk to people about my experience. But to be honest, it was a very informal kind of networking thing, and really carefully looking at the government website, just trying to, make sure I really thoroughly understood those instructions. But the more you can sort of network and meet other people who are going through similar things, who might be willing to share their experiences or share copies of the documents that they sent through, the better off you'll be. So coming to events like this, or anything else tailored to international students or international workers through all kinds of different venues is really the best way to start to build that network.
Thanks, Victoria. That's really insightful, and 100% would suggest that people come to more events like this. We have events like this happening throughout this week and throughout the next 5 weeks. So go on to My Career and look up Discovery Weeks to find more sessions like this. A next question for me would be, what's your favorite thing about working in the UK, and why do you like it here?
I think I'll go first. I think the main thing is that obviously depending on which country we come from, in my case it's Egypt, there's different industries are developed at a different level in different countries. So manufacturing is not Egypt's strong suit, or at least not machinery manufacturing, which is the field that I'm in. And so it's the good thing that I've been able to enjoy is the high level of experience. I'm surrounded by very knowledgeable colleagues, and we work to a certain standard, so we work to international standards for the machinery that we make, for the decisions that we make when we're putting a design together, etc. And that's obviously an invaluable opportunity in itself. And just the fact that it opens there, once you've started working in one field, you'll get to meet people from similar fields or from other areas who can really open up your options in terms of what career moves you might want to do next. And I think that's the main two things that have been able to benefit. There's a really strong network of people that are really knowledgeable of different things in the UK. And the standards that the companies operate at is pretty high. So it's a lot of valuable experience that can be gained.
Thanks, Yusuf.
Yeah, I think for me, to be honest, loving the UK kind of crept up on me, because when I came for my master's, I very much viewed it as, I'll do this 1 year experience abroad. US masters are quite a bit longer than they are here in the UK. So I thought, oh, I'll come here for a year, I'll have this experience. Ended up just really, getting involved in my local community, loving it here, had a wonderful time. Thought, I'll see if I get funding for this PhD. If I do, I'll come back. Got the funding. By the time I finished my PhD, I've lived in the UK for quite a long time. I'd really felt that I'd put down roots, and I came over in 2014. I would have been like 2021. So I had spent so much time here and really developed all kinds of networks here. I had, done that part-time work alongside the PhD to help me kind of move into the career I was looking at. And I just kind of reached a point where I realized I actually really love it here and I want to stay. This is where my people are. This is where my community is. And there's a lot of other things as well. I think when you come to anywhere more in Europe from the US, there are certain things like things like the NHS, as imperfect as it is, the NHS is absolutely revelatory for an American. Things like, lower incidence of shootings, and there's a lot of different kind of personal things as well, quality of life things. I really think that here in the UK, you get so much more annual leave. There's a lot more focus on your well-being as a person in your workplace than certainly what I had sort of seen or experienced in the States. So there were a lot of things that kind of came together, a mix of personal and professional things that made me want to stay, and that, as hard as it is to go through the visa process, I don't regret it. I love being here.
That's so lovely to hear. There is another question in the chat by Isaac. Where would you suggest is the best place to apply for SME companies? Also, what advice would you give to someone whose industry usually requires a driver's license and has already graduated and doesn't have one? This might be one for both of you, but maybe Yusuf, you want to pick this one up first.
It's a bit of a tough one because if the industry needs a driver's license, then sometimes they'll reject you if you don't have it, unless you have an international license. So that's how I bridged my issue. So I had an international license. I was able to drive for a year. And during that year, I applied for my provisional, and then
I think Yusuf's network has cut off. we can wait for him to come back. But Victoria, if you have any insight on that question while we wait for him to come back.
I was going to say, until he gets back, because Youssef is much better than I to answer this question. I think I can't really speak to SME companies. That's not really something that I have experience with. But in terms of the driver's license, that was an issue for me as well, because my work in going to schools and colleges, there's a lot of travel. I would say, so when I applied for the maternity cover role during my one-year student visa student extension, the DES, which is the equivalent of the graduate scheme now, almost all the jobs I was looking at were talking about a driver's license. Now, because at the University of Leeds, I had done all this part-time work when I had done a lot of travel and things like that, I would put in the application that I'm very used to traveling. I've done this previous role where I meet all the requirements. I've done this via train. I have, and I talk about how comfortable I am traveling using public transport to do these different things. Some people did still reject me, but for instance, at University of Central Lancashire and at Southampton, I did manage to convince them that I could basically meet the remit of the role without a license. So at Southampton, I was hired because it was a more long-term role. I was hired with the knowledge that I would be working towards my license when I started the job, which was great. I have my driver's license now. But it is quite difficult because getting your license in the UK is really expensive and it takes a really long time. So I didn't really want to do that until I knew I was going to be here long term. So it is one of those things that you might be able to negotiate a little bit, but it's useful if you can demonstrate in some way that you sort of understand that the reason that you need the license and you kind of have an alternative for how you're going to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We can wait for Yusuf to come back to the first part of that question. But we do have a scheme on My Career, which is also available to you after you graduate, called Exclusive to Leeds. And we partner up with a lot of small and medium enterprises in and around Leeds. And we have graduate roles, part-time roles, all that sort of stuff. So definitely give that a check and applying to those roles. We've got another question by Hadar asking, are there any particular services provided by the university regarding to the immigration plan for international graduates? I don't know if Victoria, you'd like to pick this up, or if this is a better one for Dom, maybe.
I will just say, I mean, I'm sure Tom can give you an overview of what the Career Centre offers. And I think we've talked a lot about it already. Something I know I was doing as a PhD student was in my department, there were quite a lot of international students because Brexit, the impact of Brexit was also happening during this time, which was also impacting job searching and everything else. So I know we put together an international and EU student kind of group where we would discuss stuff like this as well. So that might also be something, I don't know if that still runs in my department. It's been years since I've been away. But that is something to think about as well. Potentially the ability to mobilize other students who might be in a similar situation and coming from a similar background academically.
There's also the International Students Office. They have a building near the ZIF building, and they've been able to sort of help with most visa-related queries. And if they don't, they can, I think they have a team of lawyers they can get in touch with to resolve any more specific issues or questions.
Yeah, the Career Centre also works with a pro bono law company that deals with stuff related to visas and immigration. So if you have any questions, I'd suggest dropping into the Career Service again, Monday to Friday between 10 to 4, and speak to one of our lovely BSAs, and they'd be able to help you out. They do free appointments for all University of Leeds students and graduates. Yusuf, if you wanted to sort of continue talking about where the best place to apply for SME companies was, before we got cut off there.
Yeah, no problem. There isn't a specific list. It's more a matter of personal research. So, for example, my placement year was within an SME, and the way I found them was, um, I was studying engineering, but I was interested in solar energy specifically. So I put on solar energy on Google Maps, and I physically went to all of the solar firms that were around me in Leeds at the time. So that's one way of doing it. And then the other way of doing it is to sort of search for the field that you're interested in and emailing those companies. But the best thing tends to be to try and sort of go in person, because if you get sometimes if it gets to their general email, they may not see it, or the receptionist may not think it's important. But if you show up in person, it shows a degree of commitment, and they're more likely to take you seriously. So I'd say look up the field and that you're interested in, and then try and do it by nearby cities or the city that you're in. And Google Maps is usually a good way of doing it. Back when I was doing it, ChatGPT didn't exist, but you can also ask ChatGPT sort of what are some small to medium businesses in such and such field in the UK or in my city, and it can come up with some options. And then once you find some options, you can usually look them up on LinkedIn or on Google, and you can usually find their competitors, and then start going to a list of different businesses all within the same industry or similar industries.
That's some great advice, Yusuf. Thank you. Dom's also just given us similar advice in the Q&A box there, saying my career is a great starting point, and we advertise a lot of different employers, from large corporate employers to SMEs. And aside from that, it's often a case of building up the range of sites and places that you look at, including sector-specific sites, so similar to what Yusuf said, and also consider using LinkedIn. There's another question from Farhan, asking us what would be the best application tip for engineering roles in terms of assessments, and how is the graduate experience? That one is very targeted at Yusuf. So if you want to pick that up, please.
Oh yeah. So in terms of assessment centers, I think the best thing you can do is just try and attend. I attended a couple of mock assessment centers run by the Career Center here. And the good thing is they usually do it some are purely just by the Career Center, and some are with recruiters from real companies. So I think there's one we did with Mars a long way ago. There's also PNG. They did a specific scheme where they run an assessment center on campus, and you can get fast tracked through the application process. And it was done again with the University of Leeds. The best thing you can do is try and do 1 or 2 mock assessment centers. You learn a few tips from them. I think the harder part is actually the technical assessment. So in a lot of my prior to a lot of my interviews, I was told, oh yeah, you don't need to prepare anything. Just make sure you have like a portfolio of what you've done. In my case, it was usually CAD work, so 3D representations of things I'd drawn. But then during the interview, they asked sort of questions that relied on year 1 solid mechanics or year 1 mathematics. So better preparation would have been helpful for those interviews. But other than that, once you get through the first 2 assessments, it's usually fine. And in terms of the graduate experience, again, it varies from company to company, but the good thing is, as in the grad scheme, is that you don't have much of a commitment. So you're not fixed within one role. So you can usually learn about almost anything and everything you want to learn about in the business, as long as you're happy to speak to people from different departments, and usually they're very friendly and happy to help you with this kind of learning experience. So I'd say, yeah, just attend a couple of mock assessment centers.
Yeah, and that is perfect timing, because we do have mock assessment centers running every Tuesday up until March, and all of these mock assessment centers have different themes going on. So again, get on My Career and get yourself booked on. It's always good to have some sort of feedback before you do a real assessment center. We've got a question from Hisham asking, for companies that require security clearance, I've seen that eligibility often requires at least 3 years of UK residency. Since I've only been here for a year as a postgraduate student, does that mean I can apply at all? Or are there any exceptions? I don't know if that's a question for you, Victoria, or for you, Yusuf, or maybe that's one that Tom can pick up.
I know people who've worked in roles that require security clearance. I don't think it's easy. I think when they say 3 years, they mean 3 years, because there's also different degrees. Usually, if you need security clearance, you're applying to companies that are in like defense, and there's a reason why they want people to have been residents. It's because they can, one, background check you, because you've been in the country long enough to have some sort of record. And two, if it's on the higher level of clearance, they also want to background check your family, if that's, again, within the defense realm. So it does depend from company to company. But if you've only been here 1 year, and maybe Tom is going to give a different answer, but I think usually they would say we want 3 years.
Victoria, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's if they're saying that, it's a no-go and it's not worth your time applying. I know I was interested. I went to something about civil service roles at a certain point when I was doing my PhD, because they were really talking about how humanities might be a good fit for some of those things. And I realized 5 minutes into it that this just wasn't going to be possible for me, because they were talking about some of those sorts of requirements. It goes back to what Yusuf was saying at the beginning, that like when I was doing my job spreadsheets, any job that said anything like that needs a security clearance that I don't have, or if the job says they don't sponsor, whatever it is, just keep it off the spreadsheet, because those things are non-negotiables, and it's just going to be frustrating for you because you're going to get a no. So it narrows your pool considerably, and a lot of what you have to do is start, for instance, in my case, where the obvious specialties for me to work in, things like archaeology companies or heritage companies, where that wasn't going to be possible for me, I needed to think creatively and think outside the box about, okay, where else can I apply my skills? What kinds of companies can sponsor me and can I apply for? So if you're constantly finding that you're running into those sorts of issues where you're saying, oh, that they're not going to work with me, it might be about rethinking your approach and rethinking, okay, how else can I make my way into this sector? Or do I have to kind of rethink my approach to this sector, if that makes sense? Because unfortunately, you have to work within the visa rules, and that's what it is.
Yeah, that's some great advice. I'd also recommend reaching out to student visa advice at leeds.ac.uk. I think Natalie can put that in the chat for us. But if you have any more questions that relate to visas and visa rules and the new changes that are happening, reach out to them and they'll be more than happy to help. As a final question before we wrap things up, Victoria and Yusuf, you've been very kind to us this session. We've talked about applying to multiple jobs and having a spreadsheet and like removing companies from there that don't sponsor. But we also know that with applying for jobs, there comes a lot of rejections. Through those rejections, how do you keep your spirits up? How did you guys do it? And what are some things that you'd recommend to people currently on that journey? Thank you, Yusuf, if you want to pick that up first.
Yeah.
I
think the key thing is to ask for feedback. I think that's what kept me going, is that with every piece of feedback I received, my next application was better. So obviously it is going to vary from person to person. I started from my first year of university looking into internships, and I got nothing in my first year. I was applying for placements in my second year, and I got nothing in my second year either. I was applying for part-time jobs in both of those years, and I got nothing either. That's 2 years of basically applications and not getting anything. But my CV improved in both of those years. I learned to. I went back home and I did some shadowing in companies back home, which again, improved my CV and helped me land something in my third year. My third year, the reason why I worked with a small business is because, again, I still wasn't getting any acceptances from the bigger companies. But once that did happen, then in my fourth year, that's when I started getting more interviews, and progressing to the next stage with the bigger companies, because I had learned how to improve all of that. So get feedback from companies that reject you, get feedback from internal university departments that reject you. So I got rejected from a few jobs internally, and when I got that feedback, I was able to land student ambassador role the year after, and keep. I had some weeks where I was every day going to a different advisor at the Career Center and slightly improving an application. And so if you really put in that intense amount of effort, you will land something. It may not be what you imagined in the first place, but every sort of effort is going to have its payback. You just don't know when or how, but at some point it will happen.
Yeah, I really like that takeaway, because that's actually very similar to what I was thinking, because I think it's quite natural to get disheartened. And I think especially when you're dealing with visas, which are expensive, you're planning out your life. It's a lot of stress when you're dealing with visas to add on to job hunting, which in and of itself is stressful. So, I mean, there were definitely times when I felt pretty overwhelmed, pretty stressed out about all of that. But with that said, looking back on my journey now, there were moments, like I remember when I was still doing my PhD, I was looking for, because of course you can only work so many hours a week. So I was looking for, instead of doing kind of multiple part-time jobs, you know how like student ambassadors, you don't work every week necessarily. So a lot of times you're sort of juggling a lot of things, keeping track of the hours. And I had found this job for the final year that I thought was going to be perfect. It was going to fill some gaps in my CV. It was exactly 20 hours a week. I could just have one role. I was so excited. It was great. And then I didn't get that job. I prepped for the interview, and then I completely flopped at the interview. One of the people asking me questions, I got flustered and it went downhill, and I didn't get that job, even though I felt I would have been perfect for it. And at the time, I was just absolutely gutted. And instead, I ended up getting a part-time job at the library and continuing to work with education outreach. And when I look back at that now, it seemed like such a huge failure. But actually, the other work that I found instead has been super useful. Continuing to work with education outreach in the way I was definitely the right move, seeing my long-term career trajectory. And so a lot of times it's about anyone who's been successful in a job search, they have absolutely gotten lots of rejections and fails, even if it doesn't look like it, because that's just how a job search works. That's just the nature of it. And so it's about kind of seeing the opportunities that you do have, even if they're not the opportunities that you thought you would have, or even if it didn't work out exactly right. It's about having that mindset of being like, okay, well, this might not be what I wanted, but this is moving me in the right direction. I'm going to take this for now, see where this goes, move on to that next step. And it's about being flexible and recognizing that, you know, things change. The visa system changes. Your career trajectory or your career interests may change as you develop as a worker. Your overall goals as a person are going to change, in a span of 10 years. So it's sort of about recognizing that, that change and that flexibility. It's really, really useful to have that, and just to make the most of the opportunities that do come up. Because a lot of times it's those things that at the time you might not see, but that down the road you recognize, oh, actually, that was really way more helpful than I gave it credit for. So it's embracing the endless change and embracing the need to be flexible and to think outside the box.
That is some really, really good words of advice there from both of you, Yusuf and Victoria. Really big things to take away from that. If there's no more questions in the chat, and I think we've covered most things that people would want to talk about, If you want to just scan this QR code or click on the link that Natalie shared in the chat to share some feedback with us about how you like this session. Follow us on Instagram. We're now on LinkedIn. We've got a blog. And like both Yusuf and Victoria have said, go to more events like this. If you're interested in going to more events like this, we've got a couple coming up in the next week. There's one on the 11th about working in the public sector from 12:30 to 1:30. And there's one about working in the third sector on the 17th of February from 5:30 to 6:30. You can find the links to that in the chat as well, in the Discovery Week blog that we've shared, and they'll take you to the My Career links. Register on there and find out more from people who have great insights to share. Thank you once again, Victoria and Yusuf, for your time. You've been very kind and you've shared some lovely insights with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with everybody before we close for the day?
Just keep going. Just try again and again and again, and in the end you'll get something.
Yeah, just good luck. Keep going, and just make sure, because visas have changed a lot and they're still changing a lot. So what I would say is just make sure you're keeping up with, political changes, make sure you're keeping up with changes to the graduate route, changes to the fee increases, all those different things. Just make sure you're kind of staying on top of that, because some of those changes could end up being a bit positive for you. Some of them could impact you in ways you don't expect, but keep on top of those changes so that you can adjust your job search to whatever newest update there is in terms of the visa that you're targeting. But good luck.
Yeah. With no more questions that I see in the chat or in the Q&A session, I think we're okay to end the session here. Again, follow us on Instagram. We're at Leeds Uni Careers. Come see us. We're at 5 to 7 Chroma Terrace. The Career Centre is for life, even after you graduate. And Monday to Friday, 10 to 4, walk-in sessions with BSAs or book an appointment with a career counsellor for more specific advice. Thank you for your time, everyone, and have a lovely evening. Bye.
Thank you.